Hello and welcome to Wednesday, the middle of the week, hump day. And here we go. We have another opportunity to dig down into somebody who is playing the role of a lifetime. We get to eavesdrop in on a message originally lived out in full and living color, everyday texture, in a family situation in the city of Jerusalem, and lived out before the people of Israel thousands of years ago, and it's a story that continues to speak to us today. So we're going to just jump right on in and join Hosea in the 4th chapter as we're considering this idea of the return. This is when people, first of all, have to turn to the Lord, and boy, where He finds us, we're in rough shape. And then there is a continual turning to the Lord, and not only coming to new ideas or new revelations of God that we find impacting our life. Not that they're new to God, they're new to us because we were ignorant, we didn't know. And then we come into this revelation. Then there is the idea of reaffirming, shoring up, and restoring these areas where we tend to leak. I like that picture. What happens is we're a leaky bucket. The water it's not like we don't have a bottom, so therefore when we have water in us, it's gone. It just passes through. But it tends to just leak out. And the Lord is in an ongoing restoration and renewal work within our life, and He's mending and making us brand new as He's working with us. That's how awesome He is. It kind of reminds me of the story of the mechanic who went to his heart doctor, and he bragged to the heart doctor. He said, Doc, I can take any automobile and repair the engine so that it runs better than new. And I can do it, but you know what's not fair? The doc says, what's that? He said, well, I only get to charge about $100 an hour, $120 an hour shop fee, plus parts, plus my overhead. And so, boy, I really have to get with it to make some serious money. Look at you. You do one operation and you're practically set for life. And the doctor looked at the mechanic and said, well, I'm a heart doctor, right? He said, yeah. He says, almost like working on an engine, isn't it? He goes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I work on the engine, the heart of a car. And so why don't I get paid like you do? He says, yeah. But can you work on the engine and totally rebuild it while it's running? Hard to compare, isn't it? And so that's what we have. The Lord is working on our heart, our engine, while it's running. And He brings renewal, and He allows us not only to turn to Himself, and He draws us to Himself, but He also restores us when we start malfunctioning and going off on our own path. So now we're going to turn to the 4th chapter of the book of Hosea, where we read this. Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. Now Hosea has been living before them, how the Lord has been acting with them and how they have been acting. And this has been shown in the person of Gomer and the birth of these 2 out of 3 children that don't belong to the prophet of God. And so he says, hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. Where is the land? This is the land of Israel, the Haaretz. In fact, there is a newspaper in Israel today that's simply called Haaretz. And it is one of the newspapers of Israel because they refer to the land of Israel as simply the land. So he says he has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. How have they come to live in that land? By the Lord bringing them into the land, giving them the land, and then restoring them to the land, as going to happen in the future. At this point in time, they're in the land because of Joshua, because of the obedience of 2 spies, because of the man of God Moses apportioning the land to them, and because of the people who went in and actually subdued the land. So here they are in this land, and he says, I'm going to bring a charge against you who live in the land. Hint, this is not going to be good. A charge is when you go before a judge, and as Job put it, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And here is the charge. There is no faithfulness. Now what's faithfulness? To make a covenant and stand by it and stick with that person you have covenanted with. There's no faithfulness. There is no love. Here is the idea of chesed. This is those tender mercies of God and that form of God's love. I think it's called arabah. That is about selfless, dedicated love. He says there's no faithfulness. There's no love. There is no acknowledgement of Yahweh in the land. What are they doing? They're being faithful to the gods of Canaan. They are loving themselves, which is eros, and they are loving the gods of the land, which cannot be a godly kind of love. And there is no acknowledgement of God. There is no acknowledgement of Yahweh, the one who has revealed himself to Israel. Yahweh, the one who is there, the great I am. No acknowledgement of God in the land. They are busy focusing upon the gods and goddesses of the Canaanites, which they have exhumed, which they have discovered, and which they have been reintroduced to, the old ways of life in Haaretz, in the land. There's no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. And then he says, as if that's not bad enough. And here's the other lesson. When you displace the things of God, the nature of God, the principles of God, and the character of God, you cannot live in a vacuum. You might have heard it said that nature abhors a vacuum. Well, spiritual things abhor a vacuum. So what comes in when you push out faithfulness, godly love, and acknowledgement of God from the land? Here's what comes in. Cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. Wow. When you won't acknowledge God, when you refuse to acknowledge God, when your heart grows cold, when you turn away from the living God, you find yourself multiplying oaths. There's no trust. This cursing has to do with taking on the idea that if I don't do this, I will be cursed. Why? Because there's no faithfulness. No faithfulness. And so now you're making oaths and calling down curses upon yourself to show how serious you are. There is also putting curses on people and manipulating people. There is lying and murder. It's interesting how those two go together. You speak something as an untruth, and then ultimately life means less. And when life and dignity and honor go away, it's replaced with the wanton shedding of innocent blood. So lying and murder come in. And then stealing and adultery. You not only steal things, but you then begin to steal other people's spouses and disrupt their families. Wow. Does that sound familiar? This doesn't just apply to Israel a couple thousand years ago. This applies to America. This applies to Texas. This applies to any nation on earth and any people on earth and any person on earth who has insisted on forsaking the knowledge of God. It goes on to say, they break all bounds and bloodshed follows bloodshed. So what can this speak to us today, and what could we meditate upon today? How about if we focus on the good? that if we hear the word of the Lord and respond faithfully, then faithfulness, the love of God, and a full acknowledgement of God exists in our land. But on the flip side, if we forsake the Lord and have no time for Him and make no place for Him, we are only left with cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery, and the breaking down of boundaries. Boy, that sounds like America in 2020. The desecration and elimination of boundaries, and because life counts for less, bloodshed which follows bloodshed. Not a happy picture, but we have an opportunity to get our heart right before the Lord and return to Him and get these things straight. What would happen in my life? I need to think to myself, and maybe you can meditate upon this with me today. What would happen in my life if I got back to this place and stayed in this place of faithfulness to the Lord and to my spouse and to others, having the love of God rich in my life, and always being willing to acknowledge the Lord? That's a great place to get back to. The Lord bless you as you think about that today on this Wednesday. Hope to see you tomorrow.